Today we're going to be looking at different types of error, including a syntax error, runtime error, logic error, with examples in Python, with full explanations about what each of them are and why they might occur. So when we're programming Python, we have lots of different types of errors that will pop up. It's really normal when you're programming, especially when you're just learning program for the first time. It's very easy to make a mistake. As the result of an error, the program doesn't run as you expect it to, or could often crash. There's three main types of errors that we're going to have a look at today. We've got a syntax error, we've got a runtime error, and we've got a logic error. So first of all, let's have a little talk about what a syntax error actually is. As a definition, it's when the rules of the programming language aren't being followed. Now, every programming language works in a bit of a different way, and you've got to structure it correctly. So if you're missing, say, a symbol, or you've spelt one of the keywords incorrectly, then Python, or whatever programming language it is, won't recognize it, and it will stop your program from running correctly. So I'm going to show you a really simple syntax error that is very common. Now, one of our keywords that we've already looked at is the word print, and we know that to lay it out properly with the rules of the programming language, we might type in something like hello world inside speech marks, and then that would usually end like this. So at the moment, everything looks right. To cause a syntax error, if we forgot the brackets off the end of this, that would be classed as a syntax error because we're now not following the rules of the programming language. Now, in terms of what actually happens when we try and run a program with this, let's have a look. So at the moment I'm using idle, and this is the kind of message that we see. It tells us that the bracket was never closed. Now, this technique is actually known as debugging, where you run your program and it comes up with a simple message and it's going to try and tell you where your error actually is. This has gotten better over time, and it never used to be so specific, but this one's really clear that it knows that we've forgotten to close that bracket. We just need to fix it by closing the bracket. Another common one is people accidentally put a capital letter at the beginning of it, and you can see that the word print is now not recognized. It's a different color. So if I try and run this program now, this is the kind of message that we would get. So notice it didn't pop up in a separate little box saying syntax error this time. You've got this big ugly load of red text. Now, even though this one wasn't as concise as the last one, it does say that on line 1 is where our error has occurred. And you can see at the bottom it says name print is not defined, which means it doesn't recognize the word print and why it was there. All needs to be lowercase, and it has come up with a suggestion right at the bottom. Did you mean print or lowercase? So really good programming practice is while you're writing a program, you should run your program regularly so that you can see any errors, any syntax errors that you might have so far. The next type of error we're going to look at is something called a runtime error. Now, as the name suggests, this is something that will happen while the program is actually running, and it will stop the program from working. It'll make it crash. The most common way that this happens is because of a bad input, and if you remember, the input actually comes from the user interacting with the program while it is running. So what I've done here is I've used a technique called casting. Casting is when you change the data type of a variable from one thing to another. I've got age as my variable, so it's going to store the result of the input from the user. And in Python, an input automatically is assigned as a string, but we are going to tell Python that now it's going to be an integer, which is a whole number. So it's going to expect us to type whole number. So let's run our program and see what happens. So here's my program running. So the first time I run it, I'm going to type in I am age 20 and press enter, and you can see I've entered a whole number, which is what I was expecting. If I press enter, the program finishes and everything was fine. So this time I'm going to type in the word 20 as text, and when I press enter, we get our error. This is a runtime error. So unless you know what you're looking for, this one's not as obvious as an error, and some people might think, well, I don't understand why it's an error. I've typed in something correct. But if you look down at this bottom message that it's got for us here, invalid literal for int with base 10:20. So it doesn't like the 20 that we've typed, and it knows it was something to do with the integer that we've put in our program. So you've got to be careful when you're typing in things to interact with your program, usually as an input. You need to make sure that you've got the correct data type and you're not going to annoy Python a little bit with it. The final type of error that we're going to look at today is something known as a logic error. This is where technically everything in your program follows the rules of the programming language, so there's no syntax errors, but it doesn't give us the result that we were expecting. This one's going to check if the age that we enter is greater than or equal to 18, so 18 or above. It's going to display the message to us, adult. But if it's anything else, which means if it's under 18, it will display the message child to us. So let's run and see how this program should look. So how old are you? If I put in 20 and press enter, you can see it displays the correct message of adults. I'm just going to run it one more time and I'll show you if I enter an 18, it also accepts it as some boundary data. Right on what we should be allowing, so 18 and above, it still says adult, so it's working correctly. Now if, for example, I use the wrong symbol, this one now reads as less than or equal to 18. So even though that is a valid thing that I can use in Python, for this program, it's not going to make sense what the output is. Let's have a look. So hello world, how old are you? This time I'm going to say 20 again. We know that that should be an adult, but when I press enter, it's coming up with the message child. And if I run it one more time, and this time I'm going to put I'm 10 years old, should definitely say child. It's actually going to say the opposite and say adult. So we know that logically this doesn't make sense, and that's why it's a logic error. So finally, I just want to have another recap about the word debugging and what that actually means, and methods of debugging that we can use to try and fix the errors in our code. So as a definition, it means that we are finding and fixing errors in our code. Quite often different editors, a bit like Idle or Thonny, have different means of debugging and will try and give you hints as to what your error actually is, and it's actually considered a tool of an IDE, which is our editing environment. So there's other ways that we can also debug. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to run our code very often to test it to see if it works. That's one really good method of debugging. Reading your error messages to figure out what it is that's actually going wrong is another good method. What you saw in that last program that we were running was another debugging method, which is where I'm trying to type in different things to see what the outputs actually are. I entered 20, I entered 18, I entered 10. They were all different inputs so I can test my code thoroughly. Another method might be using print throughout your code so that you can check at which point in your code what is happening. Maybe with your variables, what value they're currently holding, and so on. And that's it for this one. I'll see you next time.